So, hold your applause. Today we're going to be in Genesis for the last time in this series. Try to contain yourself. I know it's been a long haul. We started this series in April of 2019. And most weeks we have gone through a single chapter. There at the beginning we kind of did a little bit more than one chapter, or less than one chapter at the very beginning to kind of tease some themes out. But for the most part, we have been going at a pace of one chapter a week. This week, I've got about 30 minutes, give or take, to go through about 10 chapters. So we'll see how that goes. But really, we have been talking about Joseph and his story, and today, and really the last 10 chapters is really this climactic finish to Joseph's story. The last time we looked at Joseph, we saw this rise and fall. And we saw that this was his second rise and fall. We saw that he kind of rose up from among his brothers as his dad's favorite, so he was Jacob's favorite son, and he was kind of put in charge, overseeing his brothers in a roundabout way as they were shepherding their flocks, and he would go and give his father reports, and his brothers didn't like that. So he comes to see him one day, and they say, "Here comes that little punk. Let's put him in the pit and kill him." And they decide, no, let's not kill him and have his blood on our hands. But hey, look, here comes some Midianites. We're going to sell him into slavery. We're going to make some money off this deal. And so they do that. And so we see this kind of decline of Joseph. And then we see that God is with him in his captivity. And even as he is a slave or a servant in Egypt, God puts him, blesses him and puts him in favor of Potiphar, who is one of the chief officers of Pharaoh. And so we see that Potiphar says, "All right, Joseph, I trust you. Everything that you do, I see God is blessing you. So I want you to be in charge of my household." And he puts Joseph in charge of his household. And eventually Potiphar's wife, Joseph, catches her eye. And she wants to be with him, and he keeps turning her down. And so finally, she makes false accusations against Joseph, and Joseph is again placed into bad circumstances. He's put into prison. He's not killed, but he's put into prison. And so now when we pick up the story, we see that even in prison, here again, there's going to be this rise, that God gives Joseph favor, that God blesses him and is with him. And so in prison, he meets these two guys. He's in charge of the prisoners. And over time, these two guys come to Joseph. One is the chief cupbearer, and the other is the chief baker. Baker, not cook, Amber. So, so the chief cupbearer is the guy that would be responsible for serving Pharaoh's cup. He would be responsible for making sure that what Pharaoh drank wasn't poisoned, that someone wasn't trying to assassinate Pharaoh. And then the chief baker would be the person that would do the breads and the different things in the kitchen. And so Joseph meets these two guys. They've both been thrown in prison, and they both have some strange dreams. There's this special encounter that we see in Scripture. And so the chief cupbearer says, "Joseph, I saw in my dream this vine. And this vine had on it 3 different branches. And in my dream, the third branch, it kind of sprouted and bloomed. And all of a sudden, there were grapes on this branch. And that was what I saw in my dream. And I took these grapes and from the branch, and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup. And I gave the cup to Pharaoh." And Joseph hears that, And then he hears the baker's dream, and the baker has kind of a similar dream. He says, Joseph, I dreamt that I had 3 baking pans or trays on my head, and I was wearing them like a hat. And there were 3 levels. There were 3 tiers to this hat. And in the very top, the 3rd layer, there was baked goods. There were breads and pastries and things. And in my dream, birds came down, and they were eating the bread on my hat. And Joseph hears these dreams, and he says, does God not determine the interpretation of dreams? And that's going to be significant in Joseph's life, because what Joseph has just said is, does God not determine meaning? And so as he hears these dreams, Joseph says, okay, listen, cupbearer, the dream that you had where you've pressed these grapes and you've put them back in Pharaoh's cup, that means in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to send for you, and he's going to restore you. And you are again going to be the chief cupbearer for Pharaoh. And then he goes to the baker and says, yours is not so good. In your dream, the 3 baskets are, again, 3 days, but the birds picking at that bread, in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to send you. And in the Bible, the scripture actually says he's going to lift up your head just as he lifts up the head of the cupbearer. And he's pointing to this fact that the baker will be hanged. That Pharaoh will not restore him to his position, and so he will be hanged. And lo and behold, 3 days pass, and it just so happens that it's Pharaoh's birthday, so he's going to need some wine, and he brings out the cupbearer, and he is restored, and he calls up the baker, and he hangs him. And Joseph has told the cupbearer, while he was in prison interpreting these dreams, he says, now listen, make sure you remember me. When Pharaoh restores you, make sure you tell him I'm the one that told you what these dreams meant. Okay? Make sure you do that. But nothing happens. Years go by. Actually, 2 years go by. And Joseph is still in prison, and he's waiting. He is still waiting for the cupbearer to remember him. And 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh has 2 dreams. And so Pharaoh shares his dreams with his chief magicians and those people that would have interpreted dreams for him. And he says, okay, listen, I've had these 2 dreams. The first dream, it was weird because there were these 3 really fat cows that came out of the Nile. And I saw them coming out of the Nile, and they were real plump. They would make a really good T-bone. And they come out of the Nile, and behind them, there's 7 of these, and behind them 7 skinny, anorexic-looking cows come out, and they're sick and they're weak-looking, and they come and they eat those fat cows. That's what I saw in my dream. And he says, and then I had this other dream where these really fat, nice grains of corn are growing on this stalk, and everything looks good. They would make some really good corn on the cob. And I see these big, fat, plump ears of corn, and they're swallowed up by 7 really small ears of corn. And those small ears of corn, as they eat those up and swallow those big ears of corn up, they turn to dust and they blow away. And so he tells his interpreters, his people that practice divination and the magicians and these people that should be able to help him with this. That's their job. He tells them these dreams, and they're all scratching their heads saying, I don't know. I have no idea what this means. And the cupbearer hears this, and he says, Pharaoh, listen, I know a guy that can help you. When I was in prison, I had this dream, and he told me the interpretation of the dream, and it happened. So this guy has like direct connection to God, and you need to call him in here because he can help you. And so Pharaoh calls Joseph in, and he says, okay, here's my dream, Joseph. What happened? What's God telling me? And Joseph says, listen, what this dream means is there's going to be 7 years where we're going to have a plentiful harvest. We're going to have more food than we know what to do with. Everybody that's raising crops, they're going to have a bunch of stuff. But then after those 7 years where everything is awesome, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And there's not going to be enough. And it's going to affect the whole land. And the king says, okay, but since you have realized what this dream means, what can we do about it? And Joseph says, okay, this is what we do, king. This is what we do, Pharaoh. During those 7 years where we have too much, where there's an abundance of food, what we're going to do is we need to put back 1/5 of the food. And we need to store that in storehouses. And then when those 7 years of famine come, then we can take that extra that we have stored away and we can start to ration that out. And we'll survive the famine. And not only will we survive, but these other people around us, they're going to be affected by famine too. And we can sell that food and make money for Egypt. And the Pharaoh says, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you do that? And Joseph's like, okay. So the Pharaoh takes his ring and he gives it to Joseph. And he says, Joseph, no one in Egypt will be above you except for me. I'm the only person that will have authority over you. You are now in the second highest position in Egypt. Here's my ring. This is my authority. You can have my ring. And he says, and not only that, but Joseph, you will ride in the second chariot. When we parade through town and people see us coming, they'll see me out front and you're right behind me. You're my wingman, Joseph. And when we ride in the chariots and they see you coming and they see me, they'll say, bow the knee. And people will have to bow to us. You're my wingman. You're going to be entrusted with the grain. You're going to be entrusted with all of this food. And so Joseph is again raised up into this high position of authority. And then the Bible flashes back and says, okay, now what's happening with Jacob and Judah and Simeon and Reuben and Joseph's brothers? The famine hits. They have these 7 years of plenty, and Joseph puts back this food, and then the famine hits Egypt, but it doesn't just hit Egypt. It also hits back home where Joseph's brothers and his father, where his family is living. Famine starts to hit. And Jacob sees that there's a shortage of food, and I love this. He looks at his sons and he says, why are you guys just standing there looking at each other? Go get us some food. And my mind flashes back to like when I was younger, and we do this with Corbin and Justin and Cadence now, but they'll go to like the cabinet and they'll open it and they'll look in there and then they'll close it and they'll walk around and they'll open it and they'll look at it and it's like, dude, nothing has grown in that cabinet since the last time that I know everybody has been there. You've been told that by a parent at some point in your life. But Jacob does that in his own way. He says, why are you guys just standing here looking at each other? Go get us some food. They have plenty of food in Egypt. Go buy some food and bring it back. And so the brothers leave and they go to Egypt. And they don't know that they're going to be standing in front of Joseph. And so Joseph has grown. He's changed. He now speaks Egyptian. He's not speaking to them in Hebrew. And so they come before him and he sees them. And he's going to mess with them a little bit. And so he says, you guys are spies. You guys need to be thrown into prison. And his brothers, everyone goes except for Benjamin. Benjamin stayed home, and if you remember in the story, when Jacob gets married, he marries Leah and he marries Rachel. And Leah has Simeon and Reuben and Judah, and Rachel, it would be many years, guys, before she would ever have Joseph. And that is her firstborn son to Jacob. And then before her death, she has another son, and his name is Benjamin. And so Jacob, when he sends Joseph's brothers to Egypt, he says, you can't take Benjamin. Benjamin's staying behind because I've already lost Joseph, who was the son of my beloved wife, the wife I love the most. I can't lose Benjamin. I love him. He is my beloved son, and I can't lose him. It would kill me. So he can't go. And so the brothers say, okay, we'll go. So they go and stand before Joseph, and Joseph sees all of his brothers, but he doesn't see Benjamin. And so he says, okay, you guys are spies. And they say, no, we're not spies. We're 12 brothers. And one of us isn't here. He stayed back with our dad. And the other one, he died. And they're speaking of Joseph because they don't know that that's who they're standing in front of. And so Joseph says, okay, you guys prove it. You're going to leave Simeon here. He's going to stay in prison. And you guys, when you take back the grain that you buy, when you come back, I need you to bring your other brother with you. I need to see him. I need to know that you're not spies and to see that you're telling the truth. And so they say, okay. And they leave and they take their grain with them. And as they're traveling, they are pillaging through their sacks that they have the grain in. And they find, all of our money that we were going to pay him, that we did pay him, is in our sacks. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. We're in a lot of trouble. And so they go back home. They see Jacob and they say, listen, Dad, we don't know what's happened, but somehow we came back not only with the grain that we bought, but we've still got the money that we were supposed to pay for the grain. And not only that, but dude, this guy is a monster. He's very, very cruel. This guy said that we're spies, and he made Simeon stay behind. And he said that if we want any more grain, that if we come back, that we have to bring Benjamin with us as proof that we're not spies. And Jacob says, guys, I've already lost Joseph, and now I've lost Simeon. You can't go back. If he is as cruel as you say he is, you can't go back. And so they stay. But eventually, the cabinets are empty again. And Jacob says, okay, guys, we're out of food. We're going to starve to death if you don't go back to Egypt. And so the brothers get together and Judah says, okay, we're going to go back. But Dad, you remember, he said he's not going to give us anything if we don't have Benjamin. And Jacob says, you can't take Benjamin. He's the son that I love. If anything were to happen to him, it would break my heart. It would kill me. And Judah says, Dad, it's okay. He can go with us. I promise he'll come back. He'll come back. I promise. And so Jacob says, okay, you guys go get us some grain. And when you go, take back the money that we were supposed to pay him the first time and take him some dates and some honey and some gifts and say, listen, we don't know what happened. There had to be some confusion, but here, take this and the money and let us buy some grain. And so the brothers do that. They go back before Joseph, and they still don't know who Joseph is. And so Joseph, when he sees Benjamin come in with his brothers, he can barely contain himself. Because here, now the father's son that he loves is okay. They haven't done something horrible to him that they did to Joseph. And so Joseph has to step out of the room for a little bit. And then he begins to shower Benjamin with gifts. He gives him extra food when they come together to eat their meal together. He gives him some clothes to take back home with him. And he says, okay, everything's good. You guys can go. Here's your grain. And so he sends them on their way. But Joseph has a secret plan that's in play here. And what Joseph does is he takes his silver cup that he drinks out of and he gives it to his guards and he says, okay, listen, sometime during our meal, you need to put this in their sacks. And then later, you go pursue them. And so the guards do that. They after they send the brothers on their way, the guards go. They find Joseph. They find Judah and his brothers, and they say, okay, listen, stop. Somebody has stolen from Joseph. Somebody has his silver cup. And the brothers are like, no, it's not us. Whoever's sack you find, go ahead and search them all. If you find that cup in any of our sacks, Let that person be guilty. Let him be killed. And so the guards search through the sacks and they find Joseph's silver cup in Benjamin's sack. And so they escort the brothers back to Joseph. And hold that thought for just a minute. We talked a couple of weeks ago about how Joseph's story is not about Joseph. That Joseph's story is about Judah. And so this morning, as we finish Genesis, I want to backtrack. And I want to explain why. Because as we have gone through this whole book, we don't want to miss this. So if we start all the way back at the beginning, in Genesis 3:15, we start to see why Judah will be significant. In Genesis 3:15, after the fall, we see God has to deal with sin. And not only does He curse Adam and Eve, but He also makes a promise. And that promise is that there will be a seed that will be Savior. There will be a child that is born that will be the Messiah, that He will be the deliverer. There's a promise of seed. Shortly after that, we see the first seed that Adam and Eve have are Cain and Abel. And it's not that seed because Cain kills Abel. And God blesses Adam and Eve again with a son named Seth. And for 10 generations, Seth would be the child and the lineage that bears the promise of the seed. And then after Seth, we see that God judges the earth. But God spares Noah. And God spares Noah's wife. And He spares Noah's sons and Noah's sons' wives. Why is that? Because you have to have male and female to procreate seed. And then after Noah, we see that man again starts to spread through the earth. And God looks down at Abraham and He says, Abraham, I'm calling you out of your country. And I'm making a promise to you that you will be the father of many nations, and I will give you seed. The problem, though, is Abraham and Sarah are too old for seed. So they try to help God out. And Sarah says, here, take Hagar, my handmaiden, and she will give you seed. And God says, no, this seed will be by my provision. And God gives Abraham and Sarah a son named Isaac. And he is called the child of promise. He will be the child that carries the blessing of the seed. And Isaac and Rebekah give birth to 2 children, Jacob and Esau. And we see in their story that Esau despises his birthright. He despises the seed. And we see God confirm to Jacob, Jacob, your lineage will carry the seed. You have the child of promise. And then Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. And Leah has Reuben and Simeon and Judah. And then again, years later, Rachel finally gives birth to Joseph and then Benjamin. And then we have this long story of Joseph. But in Genesis 38, we see that that story is seemingly interrupted with the story of Judah. And God is again showing us He's preserving the seed. And so He focuses on Judah in the middle of Joseph's story and says, Judah is the head of the house. Judah will be the one that carries the seed. I'm going to preserve his life through Joseph's suffering. Joseph would suffer. Joseph would go into slavery. Joseph would rise under Pharaoh to preserve the seed. And then we get to this story of Joseph and Benjamin. And watch again here how God focuses our attention back to Judah. They've been brought back. And now Judah stands before the judge with Benjamin. And Benjamin has been found holding the cup. Benjamin is red-handed. Judah doesn't know that this was a plot from Joseph. Judah just knows that Benjamin has the cup. Benjamin has been caught, and Benjamin is guilty. And he sees that. And Joseph says, Benjamin's going to be punished. And Judah cries out, please, please, don't punish him. My father loves him. It would kill my father. Don't harm him. I know he's guilty. I know he deserves your wrath. But take me. Let me appease the judge and please my father by allowing him to live. I'll stand as Benjamin's substitute. And we see Judah's actions pointing to a greater seed. We see Judah's actions here pointing to a greater Judah. The seed of all seed, the promised seed, that is Jesus. And Jesus would take our cup. Jesus would pray to the Father, Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me, yet not my will, but yours. And Jesus would say, Dad, I know you love your children. I know you love them. And I know they deserve your wrath. I know they deserve your condemnation. I know they're guilty. I know they have been caught red-handed. I know their sin separates them from you. But take me. I'll be their substitute. Put all of their sin and all of their guilt on me. I'll carry it to the cross. Give their sentence that they deserve to me. Give their death to me. Give their judgment to me. So Jesus is mocked, and He's beaten, and He's crucified. Jesus is killed and dies in our place, and He's buried. The serpent has bruised Him. But 3 days later, Jesus would rise and He would crush the head of the serpent in victory. And now He stands with all authority as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And He has the authority to forgive sins. And He has the authority and the power over death and hell and the grave. And we await His return. We await the day that He will come and restore all things to Himself, and He will rule and reign as King. And Jesus doesn't just take our cup. He offers us His own cup. In Matthew 26, it says, now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, He broke it, and He gave it to the disciples, and He said, take, eat, this is my body. And He took a cup. And when He had given thanks, He gave it to them, and He said, drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many, for the forgiveness of sins. And I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. And Jesus says, my body is broken for you. My blood is spilled out for you. Take this cup. It's yours if you just take it. My life for yours. And He invites us to His table. And He says, do this in remembrance of me. And I thought about that this week, and I thought about those words. And this morning as we come to the table, we not only remember what He has done His sacrifice on the cross for my sin and for your sin, and the forgiveness that He says, here it is. If you will just take it, it can be yours. Whatever guilt and pain and heartache you have, you can have forgiveness. Not only do we remember that, but we look ahead. And I wept this week as I remembered the words that I've read this so many times. He says, I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit again until that day when I drink it with you, new again in my Father's kingdom. So when we come to the table this morning, we not only remember what Jesus has done, but we anticipate and we wait and we look forward to what He is coming back again to finish and accomplish. He's coming back, guys. Death is not the end. And as we prayed for those people this morning, death is not the end. There's more. We don't have to fear death. We don't have to be afraid. He has the victory over death. And we can be united with Him in the power of His resurrection. Guys, that's good news. And it seems to me that death is our greatest enemy. That death is our greatest fear. And He has overcome it. And that's what we remember this morning as we come to the table. And I was reminded, as we've looked at Genesis, guys, I've loved this study. And I was reminded that after Jesus rose again, He appears to these guys as they're going to as on the road to Emmaus. And He speaks to them and He's talking to them and He's like, guys, why are you so sad? What's up? And they're like, dude, have you been under a rock? Where have you been? Do you not know what's happened here? Have you not heard of what's going on? Are you not aware of what has occurred? And Jesus is like, yeah. In fact, I'm the only one that does know what just happened. I'm the only one that does know what just occurred. Let me tell you about it. And so He starts, it says, with Moses and Moses' writings in Genesis. And Jesus starts and He explains everything concerning Himself. And guys, that's why we've looked at Genesis, because it points to Jesus. It points to that the fall was not the end, that there's more. That everything that was turned upside down, Jesus will right again. And it says their hearts burned. And I hope our hearts burn this morning as we think about who He is, that there is a passion inside of us that says He is worthy. And as we come to the table, that we celebrate who He is and what He has done.